Can you hear me? Okay, good enough. Thank you. I would like to welcome everyone to our Monday, January 24th, 2022 Educational Operations Committee meeting. Please excuse my voice. I was at Packer game and I yelled too much at the wrong time, I think, so I'm still suffering from that. But with that being the case, Mr. McKee is not feeling well and he won't be here, so I will be running the meeting for him today. First of all, I'm seeking a motion to approve the minutes of December 20th, 2021.
So moved. Second.
Any questions or anything? Okay. All in favor? Aye. Anyone against? Okay. Thank you very much. Number 3 on the agenda, public and student comment. At this time, I would like to recognize our guests who signed up to give public comment. Just a reminder to our speakers to state their name, address, and that you have 3 minutes to present, and Ms. Peck will hold up signs identifying how much time you have left to speak. Also, please do not use names in reference to a point, and to make sure that you are speaking to the board and to me directly. I thank you and welcome you. The first speaker is Mr. Grau.
Bruce Grau, Poor People's Campaign, Wausau. Reverend Martin Luther King said, "The dispossessed of this nation, the poor, both white and Negro, live in a cruelly unjust society. They must organize a revolution against the injustice, against the structures through which the society is refusing to take means which have been called for and which are at hand to lift the load of poverty." On Martin Luther King Day, you voted to proceed with a referendum calling for significant renovations and updates, including air conditioning in many schools, but not all. The targeting of Grant and Lincoln schools has been ongoing since November of 2020, when you tried to close both schools and build another one, totally disrupting a community of over 8,000 students and their families. And now you must feel you have the support to carry through this injustice, adding Franklin School to your list of targets. Back in 2020, it was pointed out that these schools represent the poorest and most racially diverse in the district, yet you persist, especially during a pandemic through which marginalized people suffer at 9 times the rate of others. Back then, you admitted that your outreach to the impacted families was inadequate, yet you persisted with the same approach. Where are the multilingual town halls, the church meetings, particularly with those most impacted? Back then, addressing the needs of struggling students and narrowing the achievement gap were identified as the #1 priority of this board by teachers and parents alike. Some of you opportunistically hoisted this as a campaign banner, yet you persist to discount their concerns through prejudiced surveys written with leading questions and limited options, none of which would improve this inequality while creating division. The achievement gap only narrows from the bottom up. Where's a community funding drive for traditionally disadvantaged real kids to thrive instead of for artificial grass and thriving egos? Drop this exclusionary survey process and save millions for supportive services and meaningful community engagement. Pitting the more advantaged schools against disadvantaged ones caters to race and class baiting. If this referendum passes, you will be refusing to take the means which are at hand to lift the load of inequality and poverty. This persistent cruelty against poor people and marginalized is immoral, and it'll have a negative effect on most students. These actions are creating more impacted people with increasingly less to lose. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Grau. At this time, number 4 on the agenda, Whole Child, Whole Wausau Short Cycle Report, Goal A4, Academic Achievement Goal in AGR. Mr. Chris Nyman, Dr. Jennifer Or am I ahead of myself?
No, I'm sorry. They were just walking up.
Oh, okay. Here I'm reading from my script already to introduce you. How about giving you a few minutes to gather yourselves? That'll be okay.
Would we want to go to 5 first? Do the capital projects?
We can go to 5. That'd be fine.
Okay.
Does anybody have any? No? Okay. We'll move to 5. Recommendation for 2022-2023 capital projects. Annually, a 3-year capital improvement plan is submitted to the Board of Education for approval. Mr. Larry Chiller, Director of Buildings and Grounds, will review notable projects recently completed as well as the effect of alternate funding sources to provide context for the upcoming planned capital improvements. The projects planned for 22-23 are provided on the final page. The administration recommends the Committee of the Whole to approve the 22-23 capital projects and corresponding budget. So with that, Larry, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. In your board, your material, you have a packet that's probably going to look very familiar to a lot of you who've seen this in the past. It spells out a lot of the projects that we've done over the years, so there's a chronological sequence to them. And that's really just for your review and information. Our capital project or our capital budget remains at $1,008,400, and it's been at that same level for, I don't remember how many years. It predates me. And as everyone is well aware, the cost of labor, materials continues to escalate, you know, in recent years at a pretty significant pace. On page 29, so the last page, the one that you see up on the screen right now, it really spells out what the need for the current or the upcoming fiscal year, the far left column, and as you can see, it's a little over $5 million. And that is really the last page of a much larger workbook, and that workbook takes a 20-year look at all the different things that capital budgets work to improve and replace. And so this budget is really a synopsis of 20 years of planned obsolescence, things that we anticipate would fail at a certain period of time. Obviously, if they don't fail during that period of time, we're not going to replace them just because, you know, a spreadsheet says to replace them. Obviously, we try to extend the life of those to the extent we're able, but some of those items just simply fail after a period of time. Obviously, the $5.2 million need for this current coming fiscal year exceeds the capital plan by a pretty fair margin. So you'll see on the right-hand side the options we have to trim that back to what the budget is. Obviously, postponement for future years, that's always an option. Everyone, I'm sure, recognizes the danger in that is you just, you know, quote unquote, kicking the can down the road. We can avoid some in the near term just by continuing to repair. We could increase operating budget to offset capital expenses, but as we all know, and I'm sure Bob will reiterate, once you push something on one side of the plate, something falls off the other. And then obviously the last one has been a subject recently here, and that would be to offset with referendum monies. Any questions on this information? Oh, I forgot to mention, it's also worth noting that we don't spell out specific projects within the capital plan. We try to keep it somewhat vague, intentionally and unintentionally. The vagueness really has to do with allowing for flexibility, so as things change, if something were to happen with an unexpected boiler failure, actually one just failed this morning, or if we had a major weather event that tore a roof off a building, something of that nature, we want to stay away from naming specific projects and approving specific projects to allow for that flexibility. Any questions I can answer for you?
No questions, but just a comment for newer board members. The reason we do this separate from the general budget that we don't approve until September or October is because there will be work that'll be done from this budget prior to that. So
Yep.
that's why this is pulled out of the general budget every year, and we don't wait until September, October, because some of this work is being done before that, such as this summer.
Yep, thank you. I'm sorry, I neglected to mention that. So obviously, the majority of our capital work happens over the summer, and with our new fiscal year starting July 1, if we were to wait until our normal process, we wouldn't have time to bid and procure materials, things of that nature.
Are there any other questions?
Okay, if not, I believe there's a motion in the board packet
Yep.
for your consideration.
Thank you, Larry. Seeking a motion to recommend to the full Board of Education the approval of the 22-23 capital projects and corresponding budget. Second. Any questions to follow up on? If not, all in favor?
Aye.
Against? So moved.
Thank you.
All right, and now we're going to step back, go to number 4, going back from 5, and let me give you an introduction as I have written down here. At this time, I would like to recognize our presenters, Mr. Nyman, Dr. Rauscher, Mr. Uding, Mr. Michelle, and the Achievement Gap Reduction AGR campus principals will present mid-year student achievement and growth data. Campus principals will be available to discuss specific questions regarding achievement, growth, and data, and which AGR strategies were implemented in kindergarten, first, second, and third grade classrooms. The team will also share district-level achievement, growth data, and next steps forward in the future. So with that, I turn it over to you.
Good evening, board members, and please accept my most sincere apologies for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. My embarrassment is only slightly diminished by I was not the only one, right? Julie and I were both standing in the same room in the wrong place at the wrong time. So thank you for your forgiveness. Slight change to our presentation tonight. John Uding had another obligation that he needed to be at, so we will pick up his portion of the presentation. So thank you for this opportunity to provide an update or the short cycle report on achievement goal number 4 included in our strategic plan. The goal is that by the spring of 2023, there will be a 30% increase in the number of students who are meeting or exceeding proficiency in reading, writing, and math as evidenced by scores on our state and local assessments. The primary measure that we used when we developed this goal back in 2018 was the forward exam. As you know, we take that every spring as an entire district. So students in grades 3, 4, 5, 8, and 10. And those percentages are updated on an annual basis. Knowing that we only have that information and that data available to us once a year, we do look at some other local data that we have available, and that is what we'll provide you with an update using tonight. That is the FastBridge assessments that we administer at the beginning, the middle, and the end of each school year. Cassie, you can go to the next slide. Oh, sorry, the one back. A leading indicator is a piece of data that we can use to predict a future outcome, and in this particular instance, it happens to be FastBridge. The two assessments that we look at data from out of FastBridge are A Reading and A Math. So A Reading is a comprehensive assessment that assesses all 5 areas of literacy, so phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. And A Math also assesses a comprehensive battery of assessments that are foundational skills that are predictors of how students will perform on the forward exam or the standardized assessment when they take it in the spring. So a couple of the questions that we look to answer each year as we look at this updated data is, how confident are we that we'll meet our 2023 goal, that we'll have a 30% increase as we're looking for? How confident are we that we'll meet our annual goals? And those are annual goals that principals developed with their staff as part of their continuous improvement plans. And we use those leading indicators to help us predict our level of success, not just waiting for forward exam results. So we do have some additional local data we're able to use. So up first, A Math. You can see here that in the fall, we had 59% of students that took the assessments in grades 2 through 9 that met or exceeded expectations. Students who did not meet or exceed would score in 2 different categories that are slightly lower, either some risk or high risk. And in the winter, you can see a very slight increase, a 1% increase in the percentage of students that were meeting or exceeding expectations. That's what it looks like for math, and on the next slide is reading. Modest increase here as well. In the fall of 2021, we had 61% of students meeting or exceeding expectations, and when we just recently completed the winter assessment, we had 62% of students meeting or exceeding expectations. And Julie's going to talk to you a little bit about some of what we've been working on to advance and continue to advance those proficiency levels.
Great. Thank you. Good evening to all of you. We are trying to be extremely proactive when we're thinking about what we want to accomplish as a team. We've built in some capacity building around responding to those fast bridge assessments and changes in our student needs over time. You know, that is the goal, is not only be able to analyze and look at student outcome scores for what they are, but how are we responsive and flexible in our instructional approaches to meet the needs of all of our kids. We have a couple of really structured events occurring where we're looking at district and campus administrator learning and collaboration to inform our continuous improvement planning process. The dates are there. This year we have great consistency in our expectations and our frameworks that we're providing for staff and for principals in a continuous improvement plan template. So for lack of a better term, it's a framework that we're looking at our current needs, our current status, our current needs as outlined by our social, emotional, and our academic data, and then looking under 3 main pillars of high-quality instructional goals, school climate and culture, and family engagement aligned with our strategic plan in order to provide actionable steps towards meeting our goals. So that is something that we've become really consistent with in the use of that K-12 tool, and all staff would be familiar with that tool. We also have some other events such as our campus data days, which are facilitated by principals and assisted and facilitated with our content area specialists, our ELA, math, and technology integration coaches. We've got some professional learning and coaching to support effective pacing and small group differentiated instruction. Those are great tools and resources for us and frameworks for us to operate to meet the needs of our students. Provided by some of our content area coaching specialists on those dates. And then we also are operating under professional learning communities at the school level and the district level to inform our grade level decisions. AGR program, just an overview to remind you. That is an agreement under statute that we follow with the state to maintain the 18-to-1 or 30-to-2 classroom ratios and provide professional learning around small group instruction to meet the needs of students. It also involves coaching, instructional coaching by a certified and licensed teacher, and we utilize not only our instructional coaches that we have in the district and our integration specialists, but also, you know, members of all of our team. Each school creates these performance objectives for students, and it outlines there what grade levels and what they're working on. So kindergarten through grade 3, this impacts with math and reading, and then we've used the FastBridge assessment with those specific probes and tools to measure student progress. And, oh, one more, sorry. Is it going? That's the same one. There we are. Oh, we did that one. We're going the wrong way. I've got it here too. Is it working for you? Oh, okay. Well, do you all have a copy of it that you're looking at? The next slide is supposed to be just the key that you're going to look at. So in terms of, there you go, perfect. They must have had some slides in there that were the same. Sorry, Cass. So what you're going to see in terms of when I introduce our principals to share their data, and when we look at the district-wide data, there's two sets of data that you will see. One is the percentage of students who are scoring in each risk category. So the pink and the reds are the high-risk students that we're highly concerned about, and the purples are the low-risk or exceeds students. So you want to see more students moving, obviously, from the pink and red into the lavender and purples. And then the second set of data, just not to be confused, is the growth data. And that is on the second half of the slides, and that's measuring how many students are at either flat growth, modest growth, typical growth, or aggressive growth. So you obviously want to see those projections moving up, that we have more students in typical growth and aggressive growth than we do in the flat or modest growth. So as we go through, each principal is here to just do a brief overview of their reading and math scores with you in terms of their benchmark data as well as their growth data.
Actually, we're going to meet. They're just here if there are questions.
Oh, okay. All right.
Slight change in plan. Just try to be respectful of everybody's time and really focus on kind of the big picture. So if you were looking at the slideshow, there are individual slides for the different schools, and some of the principals are here if you have questions when we're done. But I'm going to actually ask Cassie if you can jump to about the fifth from the end. It'll say current reading status, all schools, up in the top right. There we go. So this one will give you the big picture of grades 2 through 9, where we do the Fast Bridge test. And as Julie was saying, what we want to see is more students in the purples than in the pink. And so on the left side of the screen there, you've got the scores of all students for reading that were in the benchmark. So looking at the two purple pieces, you've got FW, so fall to winter, and the first group is our students who are at low risk. Think about that as like on grade level. And then the slightly lighter purple, way to the right, fall and winter again, those are our students who exceeded the expectations. So if you think about it, if this were translated to forward exam, you might think proficient and advanced. FastBridge uses low risks and exceeds. So and then on the right side, same colors, purple are the preferred ones, and there you can see the growth. And so the two purple there are students that have either achieved typical growth or what's known as aggressive growth. In other words, they've grown more than they would be expected to in that time. And these numbers more or less match up with the overview when Chris gave you the 59% to 60% and the 61 to 62. This is just kind of a breakdown of that for the reading. And then we have the same kind of thing for math. So again, this is grades 2 through 9 across our whole district. And again, on the left side, you've got the purples there, the students who were proficient or advanced, or if you think about it like at grade level or exceeding. And then on the right, the students who have a typical growth is the deeper purple, and the lighter growth is that aggressive growth, or the lighter purple is the aggressive growth. So I think the big picture here to think about is where, you can stay on that slide for a moment, thank you. Forward is the summative measure, the end, but FastBridge is an interim or a benchmark, and so it allows us, as Chris mentioned, it gives us an indicator of are we on track, are we increasing? And we've had some moderate growth from fall to winter at this point. Go to the next one, thanks. So then, of course, you said, well, great, we have information, so what? What's next? And honestly, a lot of the biggest so what probably, or the what's next, is what happens in individual classrooms. And a lot of our teachers spent some time in the last professional learning day, and they certainly spend time in their PLCs looking at their data for their students, their classes, and figuring out essentially what they're going to keep doing, start doing, or stop doing to make progress. And then we try to help kids learn to set their own goals and have that same sort of process. Okay, if I'm doing well, great. What are strategies I'm using I should keep doing? Is there anything getting in my way I might want to stop? Is there anything I've learned that my peers are doing that might help me that I could start? So that's the biggest next step. But of course, we have next steps as a district too, and you'll see them up there. Many of them start with continue. And I think that goes back to what Chris and Julie had shared about having common continuous improvement plans at all of our schools, K-12. So you'll see we're continuing things like our walk-through observation protocol that we started part of it is new that last year, but really we've been doing observations and giving feedback, hopefully forever. It's just a really good practice. And you know, our focus ties right back to our strategic plan of 2A, 2B, and 3E, making sure that we're looking for that environment of respect and rapport, and that's across and among students, but also students to adults in the building. Establishing the culture for learning, that's a combination of really high expectations plus the message of, yes, this is hard and it's important and we will support you because we believe you can do it. And then the demonstrating flexibility and responsiveness is very much what it sounds like. Looking at what's working well and how do we continue that, what might we want to change, and making sure we really tailor things to students' needs. Also, adult learning is a huge piece of that. That's where the other continues come in. Julie mentioned building capacity, and I think that's what all of us are trying to do, build our own capacity as learners and teachers of learning, and then help others to build their capacity as well. So you see those things noted. And with that, I am happy to answer questions or pass them to any part of the team who might be able to answer better than I can.
Questions from the board?
Adjustment of the goal for the pandemic, or did you keep it the same? Obviously, we had a lot of days out of school last year, and although we don't have that this year, we have individual students who are missing school this year. Was there any adjustment made for that, or just staying with the same aggressive goal as before?
We have just stayed with the same aggressive goal, so we've not adjusted it.
Okay.
Any other questions? So I'll ask a general question. Are we satisfied where we're at? Are we satisfied in the process? And are we going to make where we want to be? You know, you always take a look at history, you always take a look at where you're at, but now where am I going to be? Where are we going to be is very important. So I ask that question. Are we on track to where you think we can take this?
So certainly, and I think when we look at the data in terms of where we were when we set the goal back in 2018, we have made some progress, but what we've also recognized is that we have been impacted by the pandemic. And we have seen some of our scores decrease more than we expected. So I think we're currently on track to meet 75% scoring advanced or proficient in reading and 73% in math? Probably not. I think that we will come in under that. And I know that Dr. Hiltz now is currently in the process of, with us as a leadership team and our team of administrators, beginning to think about what revisions do we make to the strategic plan, and all of the goals that we have included in the strategic plan, this certainly will be one of them. So I do believe that we probably will come in under what we projected as our 30% goal. Now we can chalk that up to the pandemic, but I think it also speaks to some of what Julie and Jennifer referenced just in terms of continuing the work. And we didn't feel like we should adjust the goal at this point because though we might not make it, we'd rather struggle trying than lowering the bar to just say that we made it.
Well, I appreciate your comment on that because of the fact that you need to always know where you're at so that you can project down the road in that. And obviously, we're all concerned about where we've been with the pandemic. Obviously, we're also very concerned about the achievement gap, which we've always had a problem with to begin with. Now, that just adds on to it. I'm always wanting to look at administrators, where are we going to go? Because you need to get your people, our teachers, on board as well. And so I'm looking forward to seeing the progress. We've had some major roadblocks, and you just have to take them as roadblocks. They're not going to hold us back because our students are at risk when we start being held back. Enough of my soapbox, but keep on keeping on.
Thank you. We're looking forward to the progress as well.
Okay. If there are no other questions, go ahead.
Thank you. So I'm looking at the slide here for Lincoln, current reading status. And I'm seeing in the graph here grades K through 1. So in the first group of graphs, I don't see a bar graph for aggressive growth. But then in the second graph here, there's 17% aggressive growth. Can you explain why in that first graph there's not that aggressive growth in there?
So the two graphs on the left-hand side, those are just the percentage of students. That's achievement data, not growth data. So the left-hand side of each slide is achievement data, and the right-hand side is growth only. So the two graphs for reading and math on the right side of every slide demonstrate growth. Yep.
That's all I have.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, I can skip over 5 because we've already done that. We're going to continue on with item 6 here. The board will be presented with a 5-year fiscal forecast model for the district. The model is created using a forecasting tool called the Forecast 5cast budget projection tool. The projection model will continue to be applied during the next 4 months to aid in constructing the 22-23 budget reconciliation plan. And ultimately, the 22-23 budget. It is critical to understand that the projections are the result of many variables that independently change periodically as significant changes to the project's projections occur. Administration will bring those to us as board members as we go along. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Tess.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
In board book, you're going to see a lot of documents, and there might be some pretty small tables and charts. And I want to spend enough time on all of them to get you familiar enough and aware enough about what is being shared so you can maybe look at it a little bit closer at your leisure. And I also want to spend some time highlighting some of the data that you'll see. In the report, I start off with, next page, Cassie, recapturing all of the model assumptions that we looked at in November. And remember, November's assumptions start with a baseline. If we were to do nothing and let the status quo take over and take a very, very passive approach rather to budgeting, this is what would happen. The baseline would happen. So in this baseline, there are 5 years of data, but as Mr. Boucher already mentioned, the further along you get in the 5 years, the less confidence you can put in the projections. So we spend most of the time thinking about year 2, 3, 4, and 5, but really looking at the next year. And that next year, what would happen if we were to do nothing? The following year, you're going to see some anomalies in the data. We've got a $0 revenue limit increase for next year and $200 per year thereafter. So if you see our situation turning a little bit more rosy after next year, that's why. Because we're making an assumption that the next biennial budget has a $200 increase per pupil. Okay? So if you skip the next couple of slides and go to the first graph, slide 5, maybe slide it over just a little bit, just to show you how these are laid out. This is general fund only. Fund 10 is our general fund. All operations are in our general fund. It's not special ed, it's not debt retirement, it's not community service, it's none of that. It's the general fund, which is generally speaking, all of our operational spending. And you'll see a data page full of history. So much of this might be familiar because we lived it, even though you don't know all the exact numbers. This is the history that we've been through the last 5 years. The last column where it says budget 22, that's the year we're in the midst of. If you go to the next page, Cassie, you will see that 22 column replicated again with 5 years of projections. And these projections come from the assumptions that we made in November with a very sophisticated model that uses all the projections and a lot of data, and it tells us what's going to happen with our Fund 10 general fund over the next 5 years. Some important points to understand were numbers. This one right here. Now keep in mind the current budget is not balanced. It's out of balance by $235,000. So to start with, we have to reduce $235,000. And if all of our assumptions hold true, we have to balance an additional $1.4 million for next year. Put them both together, $1.6 million. So our do-nothing budgeting strategy, which trust me, we won't do, and we'll show you in a little while why we can't do that, if we allow the assumptions to happen and do nothing, will be in an unbalanced budget by $1.6 million. That number is a target we're going to spend a lot of time talking about over the next couple of months, okay? Now, if you take a 5-year approach to doing nothing, take a look at what happens over 5 years, and I'll point to maybe a number that means a lot, the fund balance. Fund balance, 31 million, 29 million, 25, 20, 13. For that year, the ending fund balance goes down to $5 million in only 5 years. So if you think, what if we did nothing and just let the assumptions take over and do what they normally do? And that's with a $200 per pupil revenue limit adjustment. In 5 years, if we did extend this one more year, we would be in the red with our fund balance. Our entire $30 million fund balance would be gone. So obviously we do need to do something. And if you want to take a retroactive perspective, if you go back 5 years, if we would have done nothing, our fund balance would be gone today, right? But that's how quickly these things accumulate. That 1.6 number, 1.6 million, is going to get a lot of attention. The next slide. This is again general fund, and it's only looking into the future, but it focuses on the revenue side. So on the revenue side, we get revenue from a lot of different sources. I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about one source in particular, the equalization aid or the state aid we get. And state aid we are expecting to go up quite a bit between this year and next year. We don't know yet if it's going to be as significant as what the model shows, because of a lot of that data we see October 15th. You might recall that date. Every year we wait for October 15th and we find out what the rest of the state spends, and we find out what our official spending is for the previous year. We find out our September count for students, and we get our aid number. And only then do we nail the levy and all the things that we decide on late in November. So we don't know if it's going to be quite as significant as what you see up there, but we are expecting our aid to go up. And aid going up, in general, is a very good thing. You like state aid to go up. But some people are surprised at what makes it a good thing. Some people think state aid going up means we have more money to spend. And for those of you that have been on the board for a while or in other roles, you know that additional state aid does not necessarily mean we have more spendable money. What does it mean? You know the answer, right? It means tax relief, right? Which is also a good thing. So more state aid, you have to levy less. Unless the revenue limit itself goes up, you don't get more spendable money, okay? So aid going up means levy going down. Now, oddly enough, we're going to be talking a lot over the next few months about a referendum and about the tax impact of a referendum. Referendum debt retirement, Fund 39 we call it, is only about 1/3 of our levy. The other 2/3 are the general fund. So we spend all this time talking about the referendum levy, and that's 1/3 of our levy. Meanwhile, all the crazy stuff that has a tendency to happen in the general fund that influences 2/3 of the levy can quite quickly overshadow all the discussions on the revenue or the referendum levy. In the general fund, property value obviously has an influence. Number of students has an influence. What the state does with that amount of aid has an influence. All of those things sometimes sway the general fund portion of the levy quite dramatically. All the while, we're doing a good job of keeping that referendum levy stable, and we're spending time to do all the right things with the referendum levy because that's one thing that we have control over. So we'll be talking about that a little bit more over the next few months. So this just talks about revenue. The next slide focuses more on the expenditure part. If you see salaries right off the bat, 1.26% salary increase. I thought we made an assumption earlier that salaries were going up 2.3%. Now keep in mind, we hire different numbers of people every year, right? Salary doesn't always go up 2.3. Sometimes we have unhired staff. Sometimes we have the referendum hires from last year. There are other factors that influence that salary number, and it's not always going to be 2.3% right on the nose. Next slide, please. Now we talk about special ed, and special ed almost goes lockstep with the general fund, but it's very heavy in personnel. Special ed doesn't have as much stuff to buy. They don't maintain buildings as much, not as many purchase services, very heavy on staffing. So you'll see a lot of what happened in the general fund with staffing happening in special ed. Here's the previous. Next slide shows you the projections for the special ed fund, Fund 27. This one has revenue and expenditures both on the same page. You'll see balances of zero in the end. And if you've been around for a while, you know why that happens, because at the end of the year, the special ed budget needs to balance. So anything that the special ed budget is short, it gets a transfer from Fund 10, okay, to subsidize the general or special ed. Next one breaks it down, just revenue part of special ed and the projections, and the next one is just the expense side of special ed and all the projections. Very next slide. Oftentimes, especially in days like this when we're anticipating what a referendum would do to our mill rate and our taxes, we lump Fund 38 together with Fund 39. If you want to understand the finer points, Fund 38 is the revenue limit inside, the debt retirement inside the revenue limit. This is from the energy efficiency borrowing that we did 5 years ago. As a matter of fact, the last slide on the next one, this is history. The next one is projections. If you slide all the way over to the right, this will start to reveal some zeros in fiscal year 28 because fiscal year 27, fiscal year 27 is the last of those debt retirements. So if we do pass a referendum in April, we are going to use that to wrap new debt payments around. You want to wrap it around existing debt. So in 27, that $1.1 million of levy goes away, we retire that debt, and we can use that to structure any new debt that we would have to our advantage. The next fund is Fund 39. That's the history on Fund 39. Fund 39 is referendum approved debt. The only way you can sell bonds and issue debt is if the voters tell you you should do so. And you see the efforts of some of our defeasance over the last several years. This is historical, $10 million levy, 13, 13.6, 14. And some people see that and say, well, the mill rate must have gone crazy up over that time. The mill rate went down during that time. If you've been in the room, you've been living that, right? So you know it went down 50 cents, it went down 13 cents, it went down again this year 2 cents. The next page shows the projections for Fund 39, and this is not very difficult to project. These are our debt payments. This is our regularly scheduled debt, and you'll see current year 10.7 million, next year only 538,000. But the following year, our normal debt schedule has a blip in it. We've got 2 years, 2.3 million and 2.3 million. And obviously, if we pass a referendum and we have to issue new debt, we're going to wrap it around these bubbles and blips and highs and lows in our existing debt schedule. So our existing debt schedule after this year goes down significantly, goes up, stays up, and then it goes down, and shortly thereafter it goes to zero because we will be out of debt, which could change with a vote in April, correct? Next page. Scroll up just a little bit maybe, or do that. Make it bigger if you can, the way you had it before. All right, that's good. Maybe one click smaller so we can see maybe one more. All right, there we go. This one's kind of a cartoon almost, and it's not like a lot of the graphs I show. Most of the graphs I like to have a scale, and I like to have numbers on it, and I like to have more precision. This one's more conceptual to illustrate what happens with the revenue limit on top, the green. It usually goes up. The last year and the current year, it's pretty flat, right? And equalization aid stays pretty flat. Sometimes it fluctuates. And it fluctuates a year after our enrollment fluctuates. Think about what happened to our enrollment in the district last year, 2021. Last year, we know our enrollment went down significantly. And this year, we know we recovered. So this is pretty accurate what happens with enrollment. Generally speaking, it was going down. And then in 2021, it went down abruptly. And in 22, 23, or 21, 22, it went back up. Since aid takes into account the previous summer school, September count, and January count, and aid also takes into consideration the previous year's spending, because we don't have the data on this year's yet, there's a lag. And what happened last year with the dip in enrollment affects aid this year. So if this year is a high point for our enrollment, next year is going to be a higher point for our aid. The comment I made earlier with aid is expected to go up next year, that's one of the reasons. And we don't have a 3-year rolling average to dampen that influence. It's a little bit more abrupt. And in times when enrollment's changing, you have to anticipate this. So enrollment recovers this year, aid goes up next year. And if aid goes up, the levy is what you lack in aid. So this could be a levy for this year. This would be the levy for next year. Aid goes up, revenue limit stays the same, because that's what the state biennial budget says it's going to do this year. Mill rate goes down. The next slide is a more exciting slide. This one's more my style than anything else. I'm glad most of you have seen this. You've all seen it at least once. I show this every year at the annual meeting. And the more you look at it, you digest bits and pieces of it, and you take it home. Everybody does that, right? And they look at it a little bit more. I wouldn't expect you to do that. But you digest it gradually. And the state funding formula, in particular the aid formula, draws a lot of criticism. And sometimes it draws criticism from people that understand it, and sometimes it draws a lot of criticism from people that don't understand it. But you should keep in mind that the state aid formula is a shared spending formula, that state shares in spending money with the locals. So when people hear me say, well, you don't get aid unless you spend it, and then they say, that's crazy. Why can't you get aid without spending it? Well, you have to share in a cost first. There has to be a cost, and then the district gets a part of that burden, and the state gets a part of that burden. And if you think of it that way, it's not all that crazy after all. Pretty typical of governmental spending. And the first $1,000, we only have to fund a little bit of it, and the state funds a big chunk of it. So this is all per pupil spending. So the first $1,000 we spend per student, we fund 30% of it, the state funds 70%. The next $9,700 of spending, we locally fund 37% of it, the state funds 63% of it. And then everything above that, we call that on the margin. All the marginal spending, we fund 81%, the state funds 19%. So when we talk about passing a referendum and spending additional or marginal dollars on debt retirement, you don't have to look much further than this to show that we have a 19% off coupon, so to speak, on that additional spending. Okay? So if we borrow a certain amount of money, we do have to make the debt payments, including interest, but the state gives us 19% of that. Now, because our number of students went up this year, this Wausau School District number of 578,000, that's our property value per student. That is an indicator of how wealthy the district is or our ability to fund it ourselves. And if we have more students, what happens to that number? That's property value per student. Bottom of a fraction gets bigger, what happens to the number? It gets smaller. So it takes this vertical line and it scooches it a little bit to the left. So what happens as it goes a little bit to the left? The 30% gets smaller, the 37% gets smaller, the 81 gets smaller. The state portion gets bigger, bigger, bigger. So it doesn't come as a surprise that we're going to get more state aid. On top of it, the state said in their biennial budget they're putting more money into state aid, not necessarily increasing the revenue limit to our disappointment, but they are putting more state aid into the pot. That moves this little number a little bit in that direction. It's called the secondary guarantee. So if you take that other vertical line and move it to that direction, all of these state-funded boxes get even bigger yet. So I don't usually talk about this time of year. This is usually my annual meeting delivery, but I think it's important we understand this because the referendum is going to call us into conversations that have very much to do with the state funding formula and all the nuance. So I really want to help you to understand it, and I invite any of you to come in and sit down and we can talk about this for hours. Keith can attest to that, right? This is good times, right? Okay. That's the last slide I have. So if there are any questions, I can stay up here for a little while yet, and if there's anything else I can answer for you.
Other questions? I have one. Is it true that special ed is going to get more money as we look into the future? I heard some rumblings about that is going to be taking place. Governor Evers has decided he's going to put more money into special ed.
Not in the second year of the biennium versus the first, so not for this year, but I've heard numbers as high as 50% of reimbursement. Right now it's at 30, I think. So the dollar amount that was dedicated to that in the state budget stayed the same for many, many years. It did go up for this biennium. So as more students got identified as special needs and as the costs went up and up and up, we got a lesser and lesser percentage, at least as long as I've been in this profession, until this last biennial budget. And now it's creeping up. It's 30 right now. And I think there have been reports that they're looking for 35, 40, or even 50% funding. Some states fund it 100%.
Well, and that's always a concern for us because as special ed needs are in our district, and if they increase and we're not getting funding from the state, obviously then we're putting more money over there from Fund 10.
Yes, that is very perceptive. We've had full reports to the board with special ed directors telling just that, how costs have gone up, and as a result, more money gets siphoned from Fund 10 to support those costs. They're real costs, and we need to provide for special needs students, and you have no choice but to take away from Fund 10.
Right.
So the funding that goes into special ed, it's funding for everyone because of that transfer.
And that's a good way of looking at it because if you're not putting some more money into our special ed programs, our IAPs are going up, we're taking from somewhere else. And if we're taking from somewhere else, that's affecting other students as well. And a lot of times we forget about that. So thank you very much. I think I'm losing my voice. I'm talking too much. If not, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes. All right, moving on to item 7, co-op agreement for boys hockey. There'll be an action requested at the end of this. So, Dr. Rauscher?
Thank you. And actually, I'm going to kind of walk you through the background information that you need for both this agenda item and the next one, which is the girls golf co-op, but you'll still be able to take each one separately in terms of action. So as I said, we have 2 co-op renewal requests, both for golf for our girls and then hockey for our boys. And although I'm the one who has the opportunity to be up here and speak, please know that there is a team with me who has done a lot of the background work on this. Our high school principals and our activity directors are here, and I'm sure they will be happy to join me when you have questions. So if you look at the slide here with our logos, first thing, our mission, of course, we're trying to advance student learning, achievement, and success, and also acknowledging that learning happens beyond the traditional classroom. And so that's where the logo from the middle comes, the idea of Wisconsin's redefining READY, which is a different way of looking at student success and student achievement. And we're starting to use that at both of our high schools now. And it gives the idea that we really want students to leave us college ready and career ready and life ready. And you don't pick just one of those. All three of them are intertwined. And so when you think about looking at things like WIA athletics and these co-op opportunities, I encourage you to think about the fact that academics and activities are really linked and intertwined as well. And there's some research, there's national research, the idea that students who are involved in activities like athletics tend to do better academically. It creates connections to each other, it builds skills, it connects them to our schools. So when we look at our co-curriculars, our sort of goal that sits underneath our overarching district mission is to create opportunities for students and to limit barriers. So those were kind of guiding ideas in bringing these two recommendations to you tonight. So when you talk about WIA co-ops, there is a very specific approval process that WIA encourages us to go through, and that's what you see on the left side. It starts with the schools that are interested in the co-op coming together and agreeing, and then the school board or school boards also have to agree. Then you go to your athletic conference, and that group has to agree, and then ultimately it would go on to WIA for their approval from there. And if you get approval from WIA, it does come with some strings attached, some other expectations or requirements. One is a no-cut policy. So if you're going to form a co-op team, you have to go into that knowing that any student who wants to participate is allowed to participate and become part of the team. Another expectation from WIA is that around total school enrollment. So enrollment in your school determines what division you would compete in WIA events. And if you're merging two schools or more than that in a co-op, you don't just take the number of athletes involved, you take the total enrollment from each of the schools involved and combine that. So even if a small number of athletes from one school were going to participate in the co-op, you still take that school's total enrollment and add it to the other school's total enrollment to figure out what division students would compete in. And then, of course, everything in life seems to have deadlines. So that's why you're seeing these two tonight. There's a February 1st deadline for the girls' golf co-op and an April deadline for the hockey co-op. So the first request is the girls' golf co-op. And this is a request to continue a co-op that we already have that's been very successful between East and West. And as I understand it, this co-op, this team was created so that we could offer girls golf in the Wausau School District. Before this co-op, neither East nor West had that opportunity. So it brought in a new opportunity, and as you can see from the pictures, our girls have been very successful, and we have the full support of both East and West as schools, as well as the conference, and then of WIA overall. So this has been very positive, and it's a pretty straightforward process because it's an existing successful co-op. When you look at boys hockey, we also have a successful co-op, and that is right now between East and Merrill and Newman schools. And then, of course, Wausau West has their own hockey team that functions just as Wausau West team, not as part of a co-op, and you can see pictures of the various teams there. So the reason we're requesting to renew this request is that it does preserve student opportunities, certainly for our students at East, but you'll see as we go through, it also preserves opportunities for our West students, as well as bringing in opportunities for other schools. So it meets that criteria. And it does have support of Wausau East and Wausau West, our conference, and WIA. So it's at a good spot that way to go forward. However, when you look and you say, well, you have one co-op that's between your two high schools, and you have this other co-op that's one of your high schools plus other schools, that generates some questions. So we asked what if, because we know our community does. And one of the what ifs before bringing the recommendation was to say, well, what if East and West pursued a WIA co-op for hockey? What would happen? And so, of course, we wanted to look at the impact on students and teams first, and you can see a variety of things there. I'd mentioned the no-cut policy. That in general sounds like a really good thing, but we already have about 40 students on the roster at Wausau West right now. If you add to that, you get to a very large team. And you would probably end up with multiple JV teams, and suddenly you have potential barriers with things like playing time and scheduling. So for example, if you were to most of the schools in our area don't have as many JV teams as we might have. So who do you play? Who does that new team play? You might end up with some student athletes have a great opportunity to do a lot of practice, but not actually ever compete. Or if they were able to compete, they might be traveling really far. Hudson, for example, might be one school that we know of that might have comparable numbers. So that's where the playing time and the scheduling come in. Also, if we were to form an East and West co-op, our current conference would actually lose a team. Right now, West is a team, East is a team in the co-op, the existing co-op. If East and West co-op, now you've put those two together, and in conversations we've had with Merrill, one of our current partners, they would have to seek probably some other co-op in order to be able to continue, and they would likely seek groups that would take them outside of our conference. So that has an impact certainly on our students, but also the conference overall. And then I mentioned that total student enrollment could change divisions. So based on all of that, when our athletic directors or activity directors have talked to our current conference members and just kind of did an informal straw poll, there is one team that said we could support this, that was Wausau East. There were 5 that said no thank you, and there was 1 that said we really should abstain, and that was Wausau West. So it doesn't look like we would have conference support, and it wasn't even really close, which means it is highly unlikely we would get support from WIA if we tried to push forward with that. So that's kind of the traditional WIA co-op process that we thought through. Another question that comes up is, well, what if we formed an independent team? What if we said, thanks but no thanks, WIA, we're gonna form an East-West independent hockey team so that our Wausau students could have this one team together. That actually has an even more significant impact, and it tends to be negative. For one, we would no longer be a member of a conference, so you lose all the privilege and all the support that comes from being with a conference. You would also lose the opportunity to have a conference championship. If you're not part of a conference, you can't play for a conference championship. And we would also put our tournament eligibility at risk for 2 full years. WIA would much prefer that you stay in their system, so there are potential sanctions if you step outside. And then you would still have issues with playing time, with scheduling, maybe even more intensified with scheduling because you wouldn't have the conference support. So although we looked at these and we had a lot of meetings and we talked to a lot of different people, ultimately neither East nor West felt that they could support one of these options because they create barriers and they actually might limit opportunities for students, which is the opposite of what we're trying to do. So our recommendation, and again, you can certainly take these apart and take them one at a time, and that's what I would recommend. But because we're trying to sustain those student opportunities and limit the barriers, we're asking that you would please renew the current girls golf co-op, that's East and West, and that would be a 2-year renewal. And that one would actually, if you want to move that on to the board, that's the one we would come back to at the special meeting tonight to meet that February 1st deadline. And then we're also asking that you renew the current boys hockey co-op, that's East Maryland Newman, and again, that would be for 2 years. That one we have a little bit more time, and we know that one's more complex, so you're hearing it traditionally at the committee here, and then you'd be able to move that forward to the February 14th board meeting for final approval. And the 2-year note there, when you set things up, you set it up for 2 years in a co-op system, but WIA does have an opportunity if something would shift, that agreement could be changed or terminated before that 2-year window is up. So that's kind of the big picture of how we've gotten here to the recommendations. We welcome your questions.
Any questions?
I have some. You know, in looking at this and talking with a lot of folks in athletics and neighbors and friends. You know, it's frustrating that it seems very prohibitive to allowing us to be able to do things within our own district, and I get the situation, you know, that we're in. And the conference is concerned about losing teams. And here we have an example of, you know, Wausau East football team, you know, attempted to join the GNC conference a while back. It was denied, you know, because for that, I think one of those reasons, not wanting to lose a team. And look where we are. They lost a team. They now play 8-man football, and the East players no longer have an equal opportunity, you know, to play at the standard that the Wausau West players get to have. So it's just unfortunate that it seems, you know, prohibitive, and one of the members in our conference, SPASH, you know, being a district about the size of ours, you know, not being supportive of us being able to provide equal opportunities for our players. And we talk about, I get, you know, that what the idea and the intent is to provide or prevent, you know, super teams from joining, you know, together. But I think in this instance for Wausau East hockey, I think we're talking about, it's my understanding that we're talking about 8 players, and 2 of them being upperclassmen. Is that something that can be confirmed? So we're talking about a pretty small number of players that could join a already formed, you know, hockey team. And I understand that there might be some maneuvering, you know, at the JV level, but 2 upperclassmen joining, you know, a varsity situation, I mean, that sounds like a reasonable situation. And so I don't know, I don't have the answer. I wish that we could have a little bit more support in the conference to provide opportunity, equal opportunity for our students within our own district. You know, because the other thing that's going to happen, and already does happen, is students that want to play, and it happens both ways, so I'm not saying it happens just one way, but, you know, there will be players that if they want to join a sport that's either at West or at East, are able to open enroll and do so. So we haven't stopped anything, right? I mean, the conference may have stopped it, but we haven't stopped those parents or those students from, you know, pursuing the path that they want to. So I think joining of some primary sports, especially where we're seeing declining participation, football being one because of injuries and lack of participation, is another area that we could look at as a district, and a lot of good things can come, you know, from that if we look at it, you know, from the proper lens. So again, I don't know that I don't have an answer for this particular hockey one. I'll support it. It's just frustrating that we're not able to do things that are very good or would be very good for our district and our students, and that's what it should be about, is the students and their fair access to, you know, good athletic programs. And I know that wasn't a question.
That's okay. I would clarify just one part about students being able to, say students who reside on the east side, do they have that opportunity to be on West team? It's not really a matter of open enrollment. If a student is on, you know, on the east side or the west side and would want to attend a school on the opposite, they would actually have to request an in-district transfer. So it's different than open enrollment, and that's fairly restricted. But there are families that, and students who have legitimate needs where we're able to honor those. So knowing that that can happen, not for an athletic reason, but for other reasons, typically academic, we did take a look, and Brian Miller was able to pull for me, of those 40 students who are playing hockey on the west side right now, 2 of them have east side addresses. So for some reason in their lives, they did do an in-district transfer to play, and then are able, because they're students at West, are able to play at West.
I heard you correctly. Intra-district makes it different so that the individual would not have to sit out a full year in order to play varsity, whatever, hockey, football, whatever the case might be, because the district overrules the WIA on that. If I'm not mistaken, the WIA always goes back to the districts and say, you can do what you want to do within your district.
I'm looking.
I think if they transfer prior to the 9th grade year, they'd be fine to do it, but if they transfer during their sophomore or junior year, they can still be held to the same expectations as they do unless it's a big change.
And I don't know, in my high school principal days, that was one of those things where I was said, let me get back to you. And
Correct.
then checked and double checked with WIA because it does shift.
Well, I'm not going to say anything negative about the WIA, but there are adjustments, and I do know that they ruminate over those adjustments periodically when it comes to intra-district transfers, things like that.
Informal poll of the other Valley schools. What's the process for making more of a formal push, laying out our, these would be the benefits, this is why we think it should, because I frankly think it would be better if it was an East-West co-op, but what would be the process of actually having a formal request for that and requiring these schools to officially vote and say no? Because I think unless our teams are saying that we wouldn't want it that way, I think there would be some value in actually putting it to these other schools to say, you say no. Stevens Point, who has a district as big as ours, you say no. And some of these other schools, you say no to these 8 kids that they can't play with the other kids in their same city, and actually make them say no to it.
Sure, I'll give my basic understanding, and then I welcome Brian or Kurt to speak more because they were at the actual meetings. I think this was across the activity directors who were meeting, and typically in a conference, the activity directors would defer and the principals would vote. So we didn't have the principals vote, but the principals vote with their ADs. So you can give more detail, Kurt.
So it was a formal process where it was placed in the minutes and it was put to a formal vote where everybody went through and individually voted after we went through and gave all our views and everything on it, and then we kind of talked through each scenario. And a lot of it was from the West perspective that they're sustainable already with their own program, and to have us go over there with a sustainable program where now we're losing a team which is a sustainable program right now combined, it's not really doing much justice for them. So that was kind of like the big kicker as to why they voted no, was more of the no cut was one of them, that are these kids going to be having the opportunities that they have with East Merrill Newman Co-op as opposed to going to West, and are they actually going to go to West if that opportunity is provided, or is it going to be something that's going to be not as suitable for them? So those were kind of the conversations that went through, and there was a final vote where that was the numbers and it was placed in our minutes after our meeting.
So are you saying that the West program is saying that these 8 kids in the East program wouldn't benefit from being a part of a team? And I guess I consider this all our own district.
Right.
I'm just trying to understand it,
I can maybe share a little bit on that. I don't want us to be misrepresented. So the West program is kind of in a tough spot. So when we're asked, do we want to co-op or do we need one? I mean, the answer is absolutely not. We have plenty of numbers. We have a successful program, all of those things. What I don't want to be misrepresented is that we wouldn't want those East students to be part of our program. That's certainly not it. But when you're talking about simply a co-op, it's hard to answer, yeah, we need it, because we really don't. But if the chips fell in a placement that those kids came, or the East students were able to play with us, that'd be fine with us. So we definitely don't want our school board or our district or our East students or our East program thinking that we're saying absolutely not. Does that make sense?
You're saying the West program doesn't need it. It wouldn't benefit the West program. And we're thinking about the district as a whole. I think it would maybe benefit.
Correct.
Because we don't represent East or
So
West.
so we're in a little bit of a spot, because when we're asked, do we want or need a co-op, we don't. As a district viewpoint, do I want all of our kids to be able to participate? Of course. That I want that known. But
for us to say, yeah, we want and need more kids to come in, we really don't. We have enough numbers, and as Mrs. Rauscher said, that would present some issues, especially with no cut. There are some things that if we combine under different circumstances, I think there was a pretty good plan in place to take care of some of those things. The no cut thing would it would be a little bit more of a hurdle for us in some aspects, but I'm sure we'd figure it out and get around that. So, yeah.
And one of the things that, like from an East perspective, it certainly benefits our kids, and I think personally that the combination would be a good thing. But as we started discussions with Wausau West, very cognizant of the fact that they do have a standalone program and they're doing well on their own with things. And so from our push is we don't want to put them into a situation where their kids are facing potential sanctions because of our independent stance with things. So that's where we're kind of at where it benefits us, but we're also very cognizant that we don't want to damage Wausau West and their students where they're at.
Yeah, I just think, just looking at it from a district standpoint of, we talk always about how we want to bring the east side and west side together and think more about this as a district instead of, oh, that's an east side elementary or a west side elementary. I think about it as a district as a whole, and I've seen how it works with the girls golf co-op and how it can bring students together. And sometimes we have coaches that are teachers that end up in both schools, which is also cool because they're there with students from both schools. And I went through the district back when we all from both sides of the river went to John Muir together, and I don't know, it's a cooler feeling, it's a better feeling, I think, when we can bring all of the district residents together, and I think this would be a good opportunity to do that, but not worth missing 2 years of tournaments and getting kicked out of the conference, of course. But I just wish there was more we could do to try to bring it together as one team. The more we can do that, I think, to have a district team instead of a East versus West, I think would be beneficial.
And just one other perspective, as Brian and I represent, or are part of representing Wausau West High School and our families and our students and our athletes. Again, when you start answering those questions, I can see that I'm going to hear, well, wait a minute, why would you say that you want someone else? That was my kid's spot, and those kinds of things. And I certainly know there's a bigger viewpoint here too, of our other kids across the district. But I just wanted to give you a little bit of the perspective that we're thinking about, and I wanted to really strongly state that it's not our coach, and it's certainly not me or Brian or even our athletes saying we don't want anybody from Wausau East on our team. That is not the case. It's just kind of a complex situation with.
I watched more than I played when I was at John Muir, but still is a good thing overall, I think.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Am I on? Anyway, I was going to ask, are you able to share at all what if there were different reasons from some of the other representatives in the conference for their no votes? I mean, we kind of heard a little bit of, how complex it is from a west-east, and you shared that there was otherwise, the poll went no. So were there different reasons from those other schools, and if so, what were those?
I guess, Brian, from my perspective, a lot of it was the no cut with West having the sustainable program.
So they were supporting that decision.
Right, they were kind of based on the guidelines in the co-ops, that they were afraid that, are we really adhering to these guidelines if we combine these two teams?
Cassie, if you go back to slide 3, I think. Are those some of the considerations you're referring to?
Right.
The bottom line is that the WIAA, for all practical purposes, is saying no at the top. I'm going to just say it, instead of beating around the bush. We, as a district, would like to see our athletes compete together. WIAA is not concerned about that. The only thing that would be able to go, first of all, you're not supposed to have JV programs when you're co-oping, and it's supposed to be sustaining both schools or all three schools and not just one school. Because the schools, and this is where the misinterpretation can take place, that the school, the host school, which would be West, is not accepting the East. I get that. I get that. That's not what we're saying here, but that's not what the WIA is saying. WIA is saying, all right, your conference says no, and they voted, because you principals voted based on what your ADs gave you the information on anyway, so the vote took place, and I'm sure it was formal. Having been in that situation before, I've been a part of that. So consequently, they say, all right, conference says no. Now you pursue it, and then the WIA say, well, since the conference said no, you got to leave the conference. Now you got to go independent. Now you get penalized for 2 years not being in the tournament. So for all practical purposes, we don't have a lot of people on the outside helping us work with our students to have them be able to work together, unfortunately. So
The opposite direction. You'd have to go from conference approval first and then go to WIA. Going to WIA after having the conference say no would not be useful.
well, that's exactly right, Lance. That's how they do it.
Right.
But in all practical purposes, WIA is saying, well, sorry, you're going to get penalized. You can be out of the conference, and now you don't get to be in the tournaments for 2 years, and you've got to go that route. I've seen that happen in smaller conferences as well. It's a way of preventing that from happening. And then it forces the conference to make the vote, and the conference then looks like the bad person, and we're trying to do the right thing for our students.
And I think if I'm reading some of you correctly, you're experiencing exactly what we all went through. We started with this really exciting, we started with the what if. Could we do an East-West co-op? What could this mean? What are the possibilities? And we met and we talked and we went out and talked to other people and we did some research. And each piece of information we found created another barrier until ultimately we found ourselves saying, well, if really we're trying to create these opportunities for students, at least for the next 2 years, maybe not forever, but at least for the next 2 years, where we are is probably the best option. So we went from the excitement and the what if and all the things you're talking about, and we had conversations about, well, are we talking about individual school decisions, or are we talking about what's good for us as a district? And it became a little bit defeating as we got more information.
What happens when, if we have a very similar situation to what we had with football that plays out where, we were denied, making a move to another conference, and then obviously ended up in the situation that we're at with 8-man football at East? What happens with, hockey here if it, I guess, continues to diminish to the point where maybe we feel there's no point in continuing the co-op at all with Merrill and with Newman? And then I guess the program either goes away or, continues to diminish. I mean, what happens? We saw it play out with football. What happens if that plays out here in the hockey program to where now either this co-op dissolves because of numbers, and now the East students don't have an opportunity to play hockey at all?
Again, I'll just start with the general and then I welcome other feedback, but I don't think it's a fair or an accurate comparison at this point, because East hockey within the co-op is and has been sustainable. So that is successful. They're participating in the conference, and actually the other schools, when we even said, hey, just so you know, we're having this other conversation, we're really concerned. They don't want to see the co-op go away. So I think the co-op as is sustainable, and I think it's a different situation than where we are with football.
I can give you maybe a little perspective. It's a little apples and oranges, but example right now that we have, Wausau West does not have boys swimming. So if our boys wanted to swim at Wausau East, you might think, well, they could just join the team. We would have to go through the co-op process, which may or may not. I don't know that if it's ever gone through it. It hasn't since I've been in the district. Or we would have to get to East and be a student at East High School through in-district transfer. And so that's kind of probably what would happen with hockey eventually if the program dissolved. And students would, if they wanted to play hockey, would have to in-district transfer to Wausau West if they met the criteria. And, is that it?
I think that the loss of a conference team is probably one of the biggest roadblocks for the other conference schools. So in that situation, if the West boys swimming were to co-op with East, it wouldn't be taking his team away from the conference. Whereas here, if Merrill's saying, well, if East doesn't co-op with us, we're going to go co-op with a different school that takes us out of the conference, I'm sure that's a big reason for the other conference schools resisting it.
I would guess so, yeah.
I also think, Lance, that there might be, if East were to pull out of that 3-school co-op, the co-op would melt away anyway, correct? Because they need the numbers of 8. If you're going 3 lines of hockey, you need 16, 17 student athletes.
And Merrill said if that happened, they would probably co-op with a different school, but it would be a school that would pull them out of the conference then. So
Could find some school.
Yeah.
That'd be the other thing, because they have to go awfully far north in order to do that. Yeah. All right. Go ahead.
Question. If, perchance, at some time in the future, we were to have one high school with 2 campuses, then this would be a whole different discussion. Am I correct?
Be a done deal. You wouldn't have to have co-ops within the district anymore because we'd be one high school. All right. If there are no other questions, we can go to the motion. And we're splitting these motions, correct? We want to make sure that we're going. All right, so let's start with, as I have it in line here, let's start with boys hockey. Seeking a motion to recommend to the full board the approval of the co-op for boys hockey as presented.
So moved.
Second.
Okay. Any more questions? If not, all in favor?
Aye.
Against? All right, motion goes. Motion carries. Following one, girls golf co-op. Seeking a motion to recommend to the full board the approval of the girls golf co-op agreement as presented.
So moved.
Any questions? If not, all in favor? Aye. Against? Motion carries. All right. Thank you very much for that good explanation and understanding of what's going on and how co-ops work. Appreciate that. All right, item 9 on the agenda. This is the board will review suggested changes to the Neola policies. This could take a little bit. Shall we just continue? And with that, enumerating the policies, correct? This is what we're going to be doing. All right.
What we were hoping to do tonight, we weren't going to review each policy. You've had them, you can review them. Obviously, this is also the first reading. They'll come back again. What we were hoping is we would just read through the policies, and if someone has a question or a suggestion, we would then open that and explore that question or suggestion. Is that agreeable to everyone? Okay, so we'll just start right at the top then. 563001, use of seclusion and restraint. Any questions or suggestions? Okay, seeing none, we'll continue. Policy 5772, weapons. Okay, I'll keep going until somebody stops me. Policy 6147, debt management. Next is policy 7217, also weapons, and just a reminder, maybe more for the folks who are listening, we have the number system refers to different groups. The 5,000s, for instance, are students, so 5772 is a weapons policy related to students, 7217 is a community policy. So they just have, it's the same topic, the policies are very similar, slightly different emphasis. Any questions on 7217? Seeing none. Policy 8420, school safety. Seeing none, moving on. Just in one more note, these policies, by the way, many of the changes were fairly technical. They weren't very substantial, just so people at home understand that. The next policy, 8452, AEDs. Seeing none, we'll continue. Policy 8500, food services. Seeing none. 8531, free and reduced price meals. This pace okay for everybody? Good. All right, moving on. 8660, transportation by private vehicle. Seeing none. 8800, religious and patriotic ceremonies. Seeing none. 0132.2, administrative guidelines. Nope. All right. 0144.3, conflict of interest. Seeing none. 1,400, job descriptions. Seeing none. 2260.02, English language proficiency.
That one was just added to a different section, is that right?
I'd have to check. And just so the board is aware, the way that me and my team address these is people have their areas of expertise. And so, for instance, I didn't review this one. This was probably done by our ed team.
It was recommended to reject this one.
Okay. And just for information, who reviewed that one, Cassie? And you'll see the notes at the top of who reviewed each of these. Oh, okay. Oh, I did. Again, technical corrections, it doesn't change the substance of the policy. It's oftentimes a rejection or a statutory reference, something like that. Okay. Is that good, Lance?
Yeah, well, it's a rejection of the whole policy, and I thought, I can't find my note on it now. I thought I had a note on it that it was covered somewhere else, which may explain why it's being rejected.
Yeah, typically in a case like this, we will have a policy on this. I'm guessing it is moved somewhere else, and I don't have the guideline.
Never mind. I don't have it in front of me, but I'm pretty sure I found that in a different spot.
If you see if there's a concern, let me know. We can certainly discuss that. Okay. All right. Thank you. Next policy is 2261, Title I services. Okay, thank you. Moving on, 2460.03, independent educational evaluations. Okay, seeing none. 3217, weapons. Just reference 32, the 3,000s are professional certified staff and the 4,000s are support staff. So I'm assuming that's for 4217 too. We'll go to 4120, employment of support staff. Seeing none. 5330, administration of medications. Nope. All right. 5830, student fundraising. Seeing none. 5895, student employment. Nope. All right. 6605, crowdfunding. We didn't have that policy until a few years ago.
Prior discussions, we talked about frankly, not doing crowd funding, and now it seems that we're more supportive of that, even to the extent of allowing district logos to be used. Did something change? I know the thought was before we were a little bit worried about interfering with other district fundraising initiatives. Has just the thought changed over time on that?
Yeah, it's become, Bob is in charge, oversees the crowdfunding. Bob, would you have some perspective on that?
Sure. From the time we started with Neola, we did allow crowdfunding, and it was always with superintendent review. And we try to keep a closer watch on it by using a crowdfunding platform that we've selected. If you correct me on the name of it, Donors Choose, right? So we kind of force everything through Donors Choose with Dr. Hiltz's approval. I'm trying to update myself and my thinking on this one. You're right, use of name, logo, mascot, and any other name which would associate the activity with the district is allowed. Probably makes it easier to generate funds through crowdfunding if they've been approved, legitimizing it and making it look like it's connected to the district. Now, if we didn't do it with approval from the superintendent, I'd feel a little bit more reluctant to allow that logo and the district likeness. But since we're doing it with approval from the superintendent to begin with, we might as well fully leverage our opportunity to raise funds, and the logo and the likeness does that.
Thank you.
Is that?
Yep, makes sense.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks, Lance. All right, 6610 is our next policy, student activity funds. Seeing none. 7230, gifts, grants, and bequests. Seeing none. 7550, cooperation with local governments. Seeing none. 8405, environmental health and safety. Seeing none. 8451, my favorite policy, head lice. All right, what you got?
We're actually letting them go back to the classroom until the end of the day?
I believe so. That's been a practice, I think here, certainly in other districts, yes.
Wow, okay.
Yeah. Did anybody have anything to, I'm not sure who reviewed that one.
I remember this being part of conversations with the nursing staff, and I don't remember exactly when that change happened in terms of practice, but it's been a fairly significant amount of time that we have been, once identified, sending students back to the classrooms at the end of the day.
Are parents ever given the choice that they can come immediately?
Sure.
Oh, okay, because I can understand some parents just can't get away from work, but.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, that's been our practice, and that was a change in research several years ago. The best practice would be to let them go back to class. All right, thanks, Jane. Next, 9130, public requests, suggestions, complaints. All right, seeing none. 9700, advertising and commercial activities. Seeing none. 0131.1, bylaws and policies. Seeing none. 0143.2, board member information requests. Seeing none. 0144.4, indemnification. Seeing none. 144.5, board member behavior code of conduct. Seeing none. 145, sexual or other forms of harassment. Seeing none. 1211, whistleblower protection. Seeing none. 1213, student supervision. Seeing none. 2411, school counseling and academic career planning. Seeing none. 2416, student privacy and parental access to information. Okay, seeing none. 2416.01, parental and police access to library media center information. Seeing none. Okay. 2430, district-sponsored clubs and activities. None. 2522, instructional media centers. Okay. 3112, board staff communications. Seeing none. 3213, student supervision and welfare. This is the same one we asked earlier. This is the support staff version. 3220, staff evaluation and educator effectiveness. Okay. 3340, grievance procedure. That'd be the same as 4340. Okay. 3531, unauthorized work stoppage. I'm going to skip down to 50 because these are repeats. 5113, open enrollment. Seeing none. 5511, dress and grooming. Seeing none. 5517.01, bullying. Seeing none. 5540, schools and governmental agencies. Seeing none. 5540.01, investigations involving suspected child abuse. Seeing none. And lastly, 7440.01, video surveillance and electronic monitoring. Okay. All right. Well, thank you. So we will, take your motion. And then at the next process, maybe what we can do next time is just people can ask questions if you get a second thought. We can, I think we took these pretty precisely. So thank you all.
So with that, I'm seeking a motion to recommend to the full board the changes to the Neola policies as presented by the administration.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Okay, questions? No questions? All in favor? Against? Motion pass. All right, now moving on. Legal expense summary for second quarter. Mr. Tess, you're going to be up again. Chief Finance and Business Officer, Mr. Tess, is presenting the summary report presenting all legal counsel expenses incurred during the second quarter of 21-22. Pass it off to you.
Sure. No action necessary. This is a written report you see 4 times a year, and you see it up on the screen and hopefully on your own personal screen. And with that, I'll address any questions you have.
This is similar to probably maybe even a little behind prior years. I mean, we're at 37.
I could call up the data if you really have an interest, but it isn't too far off the
Pretty
pace.
close.
I do know that from memory. I think a full year budget is $90,000, so
Right.
we're running about half.
Okay, if there are no more questions, just to remind you that we will call to order a special meeting right after this to take care of the golf, so that'll take a few minutes. So with that, I'm seeking a motion to adjourn. All in favor? Motion carries. All right. I'll let you catch up there. You give a high sign then. There you go. Okay. I would like to call to order a special meeting on Monday, January 24th, 2022. This is to approve a consent agenda, action requested, appointments, additional staff, replacement staff, contract increases, separations, resignations, contract decreases and terminations, leaves of absence, and retirements. Okay, second? All in favor? Against? Okay. Seeking, let me see, continuing on, one more. That's the consent agenda. The board will review the co-op agreement and seeking a motion to approve the girls golf co-op agreement as presented due to the fact of timing. Seeking a motion. Okay. Any other questions? If not, this is the motion to move forward with the co-op. All in favor? Against? Motion carries. Thank you, and we'll now take the final motion. I'm seeking a motion to adjourn this special meeting. Second? You got a second? Okay. All in favor? It has been adjourned. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Appreciate it. Have a great night.